9.10, which is the quarterly budget review statement for the quarter ending 30 September 2023. We have a move for recommendation, Councillor Willis, and a seconder, Councillor Scotty. Discussion, councillors. Councillor Willis?
No, I don't think I was going to speak. I just want the paperwork to get.
Well,
I'm sorry. I'd like to thank the staff for preparing the documentation. It is very detailed. Yeah, that's probably the example that I just want to.
Further discussion? Not, I'll put the motion on in favour. That is unanimous. Carried. So councillors are at item 9.11. So we need to move to suspend standing orders or anything. You're happy just for us to receive our presentation. So as mentioned earlier, we have a presentation from Michael Kazoo, Director of Financial Audit from the New South Wales Audit Office on the 2022-23 Audit of Financial Statements via Zoom. Supported by Hashim. So can they hear us?
Both just joining.
You there, Michael? Yes. Thank you for joining us tonight. And we're ready for your presentation.
All right, great. So everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, well thanks and good evening, Mayor, councillors and management and others in attendance. Thank you for the invitation for us to present our report on the conduct of the audit this evening. Just as a brief introduction for those who don't know me, my name is Michael Kazoo. I'm a director in the financial audit branch of the audit office, and also on the call would be Hashim Ali, who's the audit manager on the audit. So, is the presentation up on the screen, or do I need to?
Yeah, no, we might need you to share it, Michael.
Okay, just bear with me. I'm actually not sure how to share it.
Hashim can share it on his screen, because we can see both of you.
Well, I'm looking at the options.
Oh, sorry, I think I've got it. Okay, I think
we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great.
The speakers up to the top so you can see.
Okay, so just before I get onto the report on the conduct of the audit, I just thought it'd be useful just to provide a brief update on the work of the Auditor General. So the annual report, the annual work program was released in August, and that really shows the focus areas for the audit office over the next few years in the performance audit space. I won't go over each of them, but just a couple that are in this coming financial year that may be of interest to council. There's one on cybersecurity, and that there's a few councils selected as part of that audit, and that is really going to focus on looking at how councils are identifying and managing cybersecurity risks. Another one there that's of interest would be the road asset management performance audit we will be doing, and that's really focusing on regional roads. Regional roads and looking at how well councils are managing their roads in terms of maintenance and also renewing roads. A couple there after this financial year from 24 to 26, there's a few there I have listed, but probably the one that may be of interest to Queanbeyan-Palerang Regional Council is the future audit on amalgamated councils. Now, this is a few years down the track, so it's usually the further away it is, the less we kind of know what it's going to be about. From my understanding, the audit will examine whether amalgamated councils have achieved economies of scale, improvements to community service and reducing spending as a result of the amalgamations. So this is something that's going to happen in the next few years, and when that does come close, I'm happy to present it to council, or at least provide an update. Also, in addition to the performance audits, each year we table a report which focuses on the financial year audits, and that really looks at the audit results, key insights that we've been able to generate from our audits, and there's usually a few focus areas. I've noticed over the last few years, and I think it's the case again looking forward, the focus will be on cybersecurity, the controls around IT, and also asset management and valuations. So now I'll turn to the report on the conduct of the audit. And this report really provides a high-level summary of the audit results and also includes some key information with some analysis. So in terms of the results of the audit, as you'll be aware, we issued a qualified opinion on the 22-23 general purpose financial statements due to council not recognising the rural firefighting equipment, which in our officer's opinion is controlled by councils. I'll explain that a little bit more detail in the next slide, but there's also 2 other audits we performed, and that was on the special purpose financial statements and also in a special schedule, in particular the permissible income. And for those 2 audits, a clean audit opinion was issued. So we identify one significant audit matter, and it's a repeat from the previous year, and this is around council not recognising the rural firefighting equipment in the financial statements. In our opinion, these assets are controlled by council and should be recognised in the financial statements. And there's also no evidence to support the value of these assets, so there was a limitation on the scope of our audit, and accordingly we issued a qualified opinion. With control of these assets, we do understand, our office does understand there is judgment in determining control, but we have assessed it, and on the balance we believe councils control those assets. So this is just a bit of a summary on some of the key financial information. So the council's operating result from continuing operations was a surplus of just under $80 million, which was a 23% decrease from the previous year. And the decrease was mainly driven by a decrease in developer contributions in the current year, or in the 22-23 financial year. In terms of rates and annual charges, as you'll see, there was a 8% increase in rates and annual charges. This was partly due to the 2.5% increase in rates, but also increase in rates and annual charges of between 2.5% and 4.5%, and also there was a rise in the total number of rateable properties. Grants and contributions, as you'll see there's been a decrease. It was 136 million. It's decreased to 98 million. So it's quite a big decrease, and that's mainly due to, as I mentioned before, the decrease in developer contributions in the 22-23 financial year. In terms of the net operating result before capital grants and contributions, there was a surplus this year of $11.2 million, which, as you can see, was an improvement from the prior year, where it was close to a break even for council. And the increase in that position was predominantly driven by increase in rates and annual charges, and also a decrease in total expenses. Okay, so this slide here is just looking at the cash flows for the year, and also the cash and cash equivalents. The cash held by council as of 30 June was 25.8 million, which is a slight decrease from the previous year, which the cash position was 28 million. What that graph does show is, as you can see, there's a dark blue bars, and this represents the cash received from operating activities. And for this year, there was a net increase in cash from operating activities of 82 million. And the light grey graph there, which you can see is a negative, those grey bars represent the cash used in investing activities. It is quite common for this type of situation where across the sector, where councils will generally receive net amount of cash coming in from operations, and that cash will then be used to reinvest into assets such as roads and other infrastructure. You'll also see a maroon coloured bar graph there. That's looking at net cash received from financing activities, and they're due to councils receiving proceeds from borrowings in the 22-23 financial year and the previous year. So this slide here is looking at, so the previous slide was just on cash. This is looking at cash and investments. And as you'll see there, the total cash and investments held by council is close to just over $233 million. You'll also see that most of that balance is in externally restricted cash, which is restricted in its use by externally imposed requirements. And that's externally restricted components quite stable from the previous year. In terms of the internally restricted cash, so this is restricted in their use by resolution or policy of council, and you'll see that has increased this year. So as you see, most of the additional cash and investments received this year has been allocated to the internal allocations, which are generally used for, or they're put aside for specific programs and future plans. So these are the ratios here. So what we have focused on in this presentation are the ratios that we audit as part of the audit of the general purpose financial statements. And those 6 that we have there are those ratios. Each of them have a benchmark set by the Office of Local Government, as you can see from the slide. And what that shows is council were able to achieve 5 of the 6 benchmarks set by the Office of Local Government. I'll just quickly touch on each of them. The operating performance ratio is the first one, and this looks at how well council contain their spending within the revenue generated. And the benchmark set by the Office of Local Government is, as you can see, they're greater than 0%. So what that means is at least breaking even. And council have achieved that ratio, have exceeded that ratio with a ratio of just over 5%. This improvement in the result is mainly due to, as I mentioned before, increasing rates and annual charges, increasing interest and investment income due to the higher interest rates, and also a decrease in total expenses. The next ratio is the own source operating revenue ratio. This is looking at how reliant councils are on external funding, such as state and federal grants. And the benchmark set by the OLG is greater than 60%. So effectively meaning councils generating at least 60% of the revenue that's coming in. And the ratio for QPRC this year was just slightly below the 60% benchmark. The next ratio is the unrestricted current ratio, which indicates council's ability to meet short-term obligations when they're due. And the benchmark set by the Office of Local Government is greater than 1.5. So effectively meaning having more than $1.50 of current assets for each dollar of current liabilities. In council's ratio was just over 2. So for that ratio, council exceeded the benchmark set by the Office of Local Government. The next ratio is the debt service cover ratio. So this measures the amount of cash generated to service debt. And the benchmark set by the Office of Local Government is greater than 2 times. And as you can see, the council exceeded the benchmark with a ratio of just under 4. The last ratio there is, the rates annual charges outstanding percentage. This assesses the adequacy of debt recovery efforts. And the benchmark set by OLG is 10% or less than 10% for regional and rural councils. So effectively collecting at least more than 90% of rates and annual charges in a year. And council within that benchmark with a ratio of 7.75%. The last ratio there is the cash expense cover ratio. And this really theoretically looking at how long council could continue meeting obligations if no cash was coming in. So the benchmark set by the Office of Local Government is greater than 3 months. And as you can see, council's ratio is quite, exceeded that benchmark with a ratio of 9.5 months. So that's all I wanted to cover from our report on the conduct of the audit. Lastly, I just want to really thank management and particularly the finance team for all the support this year. I know there was quite a bit of turnover in the finance team, and we really appreciated the significant effort put in for being ready for the audit, particularly during the year-end phase of the audit. So yes, that's end of the presentation, but happy to take any questions.
Councillor, are there any questions for the presenter? Councillor Willis?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. And I did read all the material that you sent, so I'd seen all that, but it's good having talked through it. I was interested to know generally whether other councils, or how common it is for councils, in our, similar to us, in terms of geographical spread, population, a number of centres for the council to have depots and administration buildings and pools and parks and playing fields, libraries. Are other councils similar to this, so heavily reliant on grant funding?
Question. I think it varies quite a bit depending on obviously regional versus metro councils. I think in terms of regional and rural councils, there is generally quite high reliance on grants. As you can see, it does fluctuate quite a bit. So year on year, you could have certain years where it goes up a lot and sometimes where it drops down. It just really is dependent on the grants received, especially around federal and Commonwealth and state grants. So I think it does vary quite a bit, but it's not unusual to be under the 60% benchmark from what I've seen.
Okay, so that you can't detect a sort of pattern for anything other than, it's more likely in regional areas than in metropolitan.
Yeah, it is definitely, and the reason for that is you've obviously got a lot larger area, largest LGA, and with that, it's probably generally for regional and rural councils, there's less opportunities to generate revenue, so they're obviously more reliant on getting state and federal grants.
Thank you.
Scotty?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Hi, Michael. It's Michael Biscotti. How are you?
Good, thanks, Councillor.
So, Michael, it's this old chestnut, which is the RFS assets, and we had a bit of a discussion at our last audit, our last ARIC. So, noting that your office deems RFS assets as controlled by council, do you envisage any policies, policy or I hate to sort of use the word legislation, but is there something more substantial directly from your office to RFS to suggest that, given that RFS, go quite often and purchase these assets unbeknown to council? So do you envisage each council engaging their local RFSs and setting, internal policies and processes to enable that notification of when they purchase these assets? Or will that be given, or will that be placed on the RFS directly?
Yeah, it's not something that we've personally gotten involved in terms of those discussions, but I do understand. I have heard that there's some councils that may struggle to get that information, but at the same time, there are a lot of councils that have been able to get that. So I think it's just it's more around council having those discussions with the local brigade and trying to ensure they can get access to that information.
I'm still hearing that we have control of something that we don't control.
Well, there's a lot of factors that go into control. I have highlighted them in our previous management letters and also in the report on the conduct of the audit. There's a lot of different factors that go into what controls. It's not just a matter of councils saying that they can't access those assets. There's a lot of factors that go into it.
Mr. Grundy?
This is a question for staff. Will the presentation be on the public website, those that want to look at it, because obviously they can't see it?
Through Mr. Mayor, as are all the audited financial statements on the website as well, but we'll make sure the presentation goes on the website. Sorry. Thank you.
Any further councillors? No. Okay. Well, thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. I think we'll agree to disagree going forward on the RFS assets. So until someone in the state government fixes this mess, we'll continue to receive qualified audits. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Okay, let's go back to the recommendation in the business paper. So item 9.11 is presentation 2022-23 audited financial statements. Do we have a mover for the recommendation? Councillor Scotty. Seconder, Councillor Grundy. Is there discussion, councillors? Councillor Willis.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank the staff for the material that they've provided to us and answering all my questions and other councillors' questions ahead of the meeting. And I did want to note that it was interesting information about reliance on grant funding, that it's in part, probably in part to do with the nature of size of our LGA, not necessarily something deficient in ourselves. But it is something that we do need to improve because we know government at state and federal level is under its own financial pressure. And I think it would be a mistake to expect that funds will be there when we want to need them, and we've just had that experience as reported to the last council meeting with the sewage stream. It's also good to see that the proportion of unpaid rates is dropping, but I did note that the proportion of rates unpaid at 5 or more years has gone up. So I just wondered if the staff might like to comment on that and whether it's a matter of concern or something that we're looking at.
Sure.
It's my hand. Through you, Mayor. Thank you for the question. Yes, of course, staff are looking at every opportunity to improve our debt recovery measures. The council is correct. The 5-year rates outstanding is increasing whilst the overall percentage of rates outstanding is decreasing, which indicates that there are a smaller number of high value debtors. So there are some ratepayers that are increasing their debts and then ticked over to the 5 years where they have been holding unpaid shares. So that is a particular type of debt recovery that staff would need to be looking at and coming back to council with options to chase the older and longer term large value debtors.
Thank you. We did employ a new company to assist with debt recovery last year, I think, who had a very different approach. And I understood from what we heard so far that was producing results for residents and other ratepayers as well as for the council. So this is a different sort of issue from the sounds of it.
Is there further discussion, councillors? I might make a couple of very brief comments myself and thank Mr. Monaghan and all the staff involved for all the work that they've no doubt done in working with the auditors to get to this point. I thought it was interesting last night when we talked in the workshop about how much the cost of these have increased over the last couple of years. I think if councillors over a moment, I wouldn't actually mind writing a letter to whoever the relevant person is within the state government expressing our concerns that it's tripled. Is that incorrect in the last couple of years? So that's something that the GM and I might take on board. And just, I know we made, is it 5 or 6 or 6 or 7 of the benchmarks that are set for councils. The one we've missed is probably the one that is the most acceptable to miss. I think we've got a very political reply regarding how much grants we've received in the past. It's a fact that we're in very marginal state and federal seats. We've been very lucky to receive a whole heap of grants over my time on council, particularly when the Deputy Premier was our local member, and that's what happens. You get hundreds of millions of dollars in grants. It's very difficult to meet that benchmark, and I think that's what we see. So on that note, I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? It's unanimous and carried.